He was reborn into a new world, yet he didn't bother questioning why. No destiny, no hero's rhetoric, just a laid-back acceptance and a flow with whatever comes. Soon, he notices that something is off. Each action costs only a single experience point. Fishing, leveling up. Hunting, leveling up. Even breathing might be leveling him up. While others grind for years, he drifts through life effortlessly, becoming unstoppable. This happens when the system malfunctions and the coolest guy exploits it. The story begins with Kazuma Nakamichi being apologized to by a friend for forcing him to come along. He had been alone all this time, hadn't he? She thought perhaps it would help clear his mind. The girl asked if he was thirsty and offered to buy him water. She hurried across a crosswalk toward a nearby store, but Kazuma saw a large truck rushing toward her. He shouted for her to be careful, but she didn't hear him. Without thinking, he sprinted after her. He managed to push her out of the path, yet was hit by the vehicle himself. When he regained consciousness, he tried to understand his surroundings. He found himself perching on a sturdy branch of a towering tree. Surprised, he exclaimed, "Why am I here?" In confusion, he wondered if he had just arrived in heaven or if he was truly dead. Looking around, he mumbled, "Anyway, I'm thirsty. Where's some water?" His gaze fell on a nearby river. Without hesitation, he jumped from the tree and hurried toward it. Reaching the water's edge, he scooped it up with his hands and drank deeply, feeling relief. After quenching his thirst, he chuckled and wondered aloud, "I've been reborn. Did I really die? Or am I still alive?" The sensation of the water and the landscape remained familiar, just like life. Though unsure of his location, he instinctively felt that he was alive. As he surveyed the area again, he noticed a small, old hut nearby. Surprised, he approached cautiously, peered inside, and called out if anyone was there. No response, complete silence. He stepped inside, listening carefully, then looked around. "Is anyone here?" he asked in confusion. The interior seemed untouched for a long time. Dust blanketed the furniture. Quietly, Kazuma whispered, "I ask the owner's forgiveness, but may I stay here for a while?" His stomach growled loudly, signaling hunger. Clutching his belly, he muttered, "Yes, he's hungry. If only there were some food." Exploring further, he soon spotted a fishing rod lying nearby. Seizing the opportunity, he declared, "Good chance to capitalize while the iron's hot." Kazuma ran to the river, found bait beneath some rocks, and cast his line. To his surprise, he felt a tug almost immediately. With excitement, he pulled out a massive fish and exclaimed, "First catch! Not bad at all." Suddenly, a voice informed him that his fishing skill had increased from level 1 to level 3. The protagonist stared in confusion, exclaiming, "What is this?" A voice echoed inside his mind, repeating the question. Suddenly, a system window materialized before him, displaying the same information. He ruffled his hair in bewilderment, uncertain if catching a fish had improved his fishing skills. It made little sense, but he realized 2 fish wouldn't suffice for his needs. More was necessary. He decided to try catching a few additional fish. Soon, he landed another great catch and cheerfully noted, 3 fish? That's a solid start for a first fishing trip." Yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, as he had never seen such a fish before. The evidence before him was undeniable, yet he refused to believe it. After pondering briefly, he resolved to set aside his doubts. Food was the priority and he needed to eat. Behind his hut, he spotted firewood and a tinderbox beside a basket. After some time, the fish was ready, and he admired it, thinking, "That looks delicious." Just as he was about to start eating, the system window reappeared. He was taken aback, having done nothing to prompt it. The system announced that his cooking skill had risen from level 1 to level 5. Perplexed, the protagonist wondered if anything other than cooking could improve that skill. Hunger was pressing, so he decided to delay further investigation. Not wanting his fish to go cold, he wished himself a bon appetit and sank his teeth into the juicy flesh. Kazuma was utterly delighted. The fish tasted amazing. Though the appearance was a bit unsettling, the flavor was superb. As he looked at the stove with glowing coals, he realized he needed more wood. Behind the hut, he suddenly saw a fierce monster among the firewood. Their eyes met in surprise. The creature let out a thunderous roar, causing his ears to ring. Terrified, Kazuma understood that something was terribly wrong. The enraged beast growled fiercely. Desperately, he reached for a nearby lid, a makeshift shield, and held it up defensively. The monster lunged again, growling and pushing against him aggressively. Kazuma yelled in panic, fearing for his life. He had to find a way to win or face death. Spotting an axe on the ground, he thought, "This is it." With uncertain hands, he grabbed it, waited for the right moment as the monster approached. He leapt over his shield and swung the axe with all his might, striking directly into the creature's head. The beast fell dead, and the protagonist muttered in disbelief, "I did it!" Joy flooded through him. At that moment, the system activated again, informing him he had gained an axe skill along with increased strength, stamina, and health. Covering his ears, he silently begged for the noise to stop. Catching his breath, Kazuma was relieved to be intact, pondering that he might also be able to eat the monster. Food no longer seemed to be an issue for the time being, and a familiar feeling settled over him, one he hadn't experienced in a while. He appreciated that his social anxiety wasn't flaring up, even as he found himself alone once again. Returning to the hut, he sensed an unfamiliar exhaustion creeping in. A warm shower was desperately needed. Suddenly, he remembered what was beneath the lid. A bath barrel, the very same he'd seen before. He knew he could fill it with river water, heat it, and enjoy a bath, but first, firewood had to be gathered. As he collected sticks and branches, the system's voice chimed in once more, announcing his level had increased. Annoyed, he muttered under his breath, wondering how many more levels he could gain. Afterward, he placed the barrel on a makeshift stove, fetched water from the river, and lit a fire to warm it. Exhaling with fatigue, he reflected that even a simple bath in primitive life felt like an achievement. Suddenly, he remembered the boar he had slain. Leaving it to spoil was not an option. He had to process it while the water heated. As he butchered the carcass, he promised himself it would be cooked beautifully again. The system promptly informed him about the skinning skill, to which he responded with a grumble, "Yes, I got it. I understand." Having dealt with the meat, he packed it into a linen bag he'd found in the hut and submerged it in river water, ensuring it would last for a couple of days. He hadn't anticipated that watching survival tutorials would come in handy in such a place. Once this task was complete, he recalled the lack of essential items like bath towels. A quick inspection of the hut revealed a drawer near the bed, within which he found a towel, smaller than a typical bath towel, but much better than nothing. There were 2 sets of clothes inside as well. They looked like medieval peasant attire, but now was not the moment for fashion opinions. He stepped outside to check the water temperature in the makeshift bath. Perfect. Unable to delay any longer, he stripped down and slipped into the warm water, relishing the sensation of a good soak. As he relaxed, his thoughts drifted toward leveling up. It felt familiar, as if in a game, and he reminded himself this was no longer Earth. What had truly happened to him? He shook his head, trying to clear the confusion. Still, he was certain of one thing. The food was delicious, and the bath was soothing. That meant he was alive, and there was no point dwelling on what had transpired. Survival was his goal, and he was determined to succeed. Starting from the next day, he planned to explore the region around him. His efforts paid off as he gathered a plentiful supply of mushrooms, which made him quite pleased. Suddenly, wild boars appeared once more in front of him. His eyes widened with surprise. There they were again. He had defeated their companion in the very beginning and had been fighting these creatures for a month now. If anything, they hadn't learned a thing. Despite every effort, it all proved futile. Do they truly comprehend this? The monsters began to encircle him, and the largest adversary stepped forward with a commanding presence. The protagonist scattered the mushrooms around him in surprise and wondered aloud, "Have they brought their leader today? How enormous he looks!" He resolved to test his strength against such a formidable foe. Adjusting his grip firmly on the axe handle, he prepared for battle. The enemy swiftly seized him, lifting him off the ground and hurling him into the air. As he fell, he reflected, "If a beast this massive hits me, I might not survive." Quickly, the protagonist dashed toward a nearby tree entwined with vines and shouted a warning to the monsters. He was already aware of their weaknesses. They reacted well to lateral movements but were notably vulnerable from above. With that knowledge, Kazuma skillfully climbed the vines up the tree, delivering a powerful downward strike to the beast. The monster, resembling a giant boar, was swiftly dealt with, collapsing easily. Kazuma then jumped back to the ground as the remaining monsters prepared to attack anew. He shouted sharply to them, reinforcing their understanding. Do they finally grasp the situation? Let them not squander their lives in vain. With a swing of his axe, the remaining foes scattered, fleeing in fear. Approaching the fallen monster, he touched its hide and mused, "It's still quite large, though." The issue of meat had thus been temporarily resolved. Suddenly, he heard faint cries for help, making him cautious. Could that sound be coming from the forest beyond? Someone was calling out in distress. Holding his axe tightly, the protagonist sprinted toward the source, listening intently. Climbing a nearby hill, he saw several individuals surrounded by wild boars, men and women caught in a perilous trap. One of the girls screamed again, her voice trembling with fear. Garrett shouted loudly to command attention. Arius, the princess, and the others stepped back. "We'll handle this." The princess quickly added, "There are too many enemies, and behind them is a sheer cliff. There's nowhere to run." Garrett ordered his guards to form a defensive crescent. They swiftly arranged themselves into a semicircle, shielding the women from harm. The boy called out, "They're coming. We can't afford to miss even one monster." At that moment, Kazuma leapt down from the hilltop, landing directly in front of the monsters, commanding them to cease their advance. He rolled up his sleeves confidently and faced the creatures, shouting, "You just won't settle down, huh?" Activating his magical aura, he taunted them with a threat. "Should I turn you into steaks or something?" The travelers watched him in astonishment. The monster's eyes widened upon recognizing Kazuma and, suddenly, they broke formation and scattered, darting away in fear. The astonished onlookers stared in disbelief. The protagonist turned to them, offering a reassuring smile and asking if they were unharmed. Then he commented, "These boars attacked indiscriminately." Garrett, puzzled, told him he didn't know who this unexpected ally was but recognized that he had saved them. The protagonist responded modestly, "It's nothing special." At that moment, the system beeped, informing him that he had mastered the skill of intimidation. Arya stepped forward with her warriors, approaching the protagonist and expressing that she should thank him personally. Meanwhile, a voice continued singing praises of the new skill's benefits. Frustrated, the protagonist cupped his ears and snapped, "He already understands." The princess looked at him with confusion and then remarked, "His level is leveling up far faster than usual, isn't it?" The protagonist felt a twinge of embarrassment but nodded in acknowledgement. "It was noisy, sorry about that," he admitted. They checked to see if anyone was hurt, though it was their first encounter in this region. Garrett moved ahead, introduced himself, and explained they were travelers who had lost their way in these woods due to unforeseen circumstances. The protagonist shared his name and expressed a desire to clarify something. Garrett listened intently before gasping in disbelief. "Impossible," he muttered. He had been alone in this forest for quite some time. Thinking deeply, Garrett then approached Arya, apologized to the protagonist, and asked for permission to speak privately with her. The princess turned to Garrett and asked what plans he had. The young man replied that Kazuma did not seem to belong to Bergen's people and appeared familiar with this environment. Arya proposed that Kazuma could serve as their guide. Garrett nodded in agreement. Arya added that based on Kazuma's earlier heroism, he seemed trustworthy, at least a good person. Garrett agreed to ask him about it. As Arya adjusted her hair, The protagonist suddenly exclaimed, "Those earrings, and if he looks closely, the necklace too, are made of the same material." Arya explained it was a rare gemstone called a grand ruby. The protagonist then revealed his own amulet, crafted from the same stone, and said, "It's identical to mine." Arya looked puzzled. "It can't be," she said. Garrett, eyes wide with amazement, exclaimed, "A grand ruby this size? I've never seen one like it." He then asked the protagonist, perplexed, "Where did you get it? Are you perhaps part of a royal family or something similar?" The protagonist blushed before chuckling and replied, "No, I made it myself." The process was especially challenging. Garrett was overwhelmed by surprise and pressed further. "You made it yourself? But more importantly, where did you find such a stone?" Kazuma pointed in a certain direction and explained, "Near that crevice in the rocks. Beyond it lies the cave where I found the gemstone." Garrett gasped, "So, that's where the grand ruby deposits are?" Kazuma nodded. "Yes, indeed," he confirmed. Without counting precisely, he estimated that there were probably about 1,000 stones embedded in the walls. Everyone present stared in awe at such a number. Kazuma, smiling gently, looked around. Garrett had initially apologized for what might seem an overreach, but then asked if he could lead them to the site. Kazuma agreed without hesitation, mentioning that it was a bit of a distance. He would fetch a torch from the hut and guide them there. After some time, the group arrived at the entrance of the Grand Ruby deposit, nestled within a narrow crack in the rock face. The protagonist indicated that this was the way inside. Garrett examined the crevice closely and muttered, "I see. The deposit lies deep within the forest. No wonder it's remained undiscovered for so long." Taking a deep breath, the protagonist squeezed through the narrow passage with relative ease, while Garrett struggled and was momentarily stuck. His companions helped push him through, and soon everyone had entered the cavern. Inside, the protagonist lit a torch, checking on his companions and warning them to proceed carefully, as the ground was slick and treacherous. He moved forward cautiously, but suddenly halted, signaling them to step back. Garrett asked what was wrong, and Kazuma pointed ahead, saying, "There's a lizard up ahead." He exhaled in relief, wondering why they'd been so startled. It was simply a lizard, probably mistaken for a rumble boar or something similar. Abruptly, a creature of immense size emerged from the darkness and released a spine-chilling roar. The sight of it froze everyone in terror, their hair standing on end. Garrett exclaimed, "It's him again, a dopehatter, a fierce B-rank monster." The beast knocked aside rocks, widening the passage as it came forward. Kazuma marveled at its enormous size. Garrett commanded everyone to retreat. The protagonist, however, looked at the creature with interest and rushed to attack. Garrett shouted in horror, warning that Kazuma couldn't defeat the dopehatter alone. The monster, caught off guard by the sudden attack, roared even louder and thrashed wildly. The protagonist barely maintained his footing, evading the creature's limbs. In a swift move, he performed a somersault, slicing off one of the monster's limbs, then rebounded and leaped from above to strike the creature down. The beast collapsed to the ground, defeated. The entire party was stunned by what they had just witnessed. Turning to them, the protagonist casually said, "It's nothing, really. We only have a little time left." Once the shock faded, they pressed onward, casting wary glances at the fallen monster. The protagonist then mentioned that the lizard's meat was especially delicious and suggested they pick some up on their way out. Garrett watched him in bewilderment, pondering how this boy seemed unfazed by such dangers. Who was he, truly? Finally, Kazuma announced, "We've arrived. It's here." The group looked around in awe at the walls glittering with countless stones. The protagonist took a bag from his pack, revealing all the treasure he had previously uncovered. Peering inside, everyone let out surprised exhalations. Garrett exclaimed, "It's real. These are grand rubies and enormous stones." The protagonist, with a content smile, confirmed that he hadn't lied to them. Garrett studied him carefully and finally said he had something important to discuss. The protagonist simply replied that if they wanted the rubies, he would give them to them, as he didn't know their true worth. Garrett exclaimed in shock, unable to comprehend what he was seeing. The princess turned to the main character and asked, "Is this serious? Is he really okay with it?" The protagonist offered a calm, innocent smile and responded, "Yes." Moved by his gesture, Eris told him she owed him a debt. The discovery of the deposit was a monumental event for their nation. The main character announced, "Really? In that case, let them take as much as they need." Garrett, inspired, said, "With this, they'll be able to restore the country." Kazuma looked at him, bewildered, and asked again, "Restore the country? So they have an important mission." He wished them success in their endeavor. Soon after, the protagonist proposed they split up and hurriedly carried the loot towards the exit. He believed that working together would speed up the process. The princess gazed at him intently and asked if he could accompany them a little longer. The main character was surprised but listened as Arius, a companion, took his hand and explained that they were being pursued by dangerous enemies. Their safety would be much better assured with a dependable ally like him. She begged him not to refuse. He hesitated, weighing their need for him against his curiosity about the outside world. After some thought, he agreed to stay for a short time. The princess was thrilled with his answer. Garrett expressed his gratitude and added that they were now under his command. They loaded the stones into their sacks, the entire group heading out with the main character at the front. Suddenly, Garrett shouted in alarm. What kind of monster was that? The protagonist asked what had caused the outcry. Garrett explained that they had asked him to save their group. Turning around, the main character saw a colossal creature, unimaginably large. What was it? One of the travelers shouted. It's a Titanos, a rank A monster. Everyone needs to run. The crowd scattered in panic, but the main character stayed rooted, surprised to realize he'd never encountered such a foe before. Could he handle it? Guards, following Garrett's orders, protected the women. Then the boy yelled, "Kazuma, the gap between rank A and B monsters is immense, like heaven and earth. Fighting this alone would be foolish." Tataros grinned at Kazuma, sizing him up. The main character thought to himself, "What an expression he has." He tightened his grip on his axe, sensing that the enemy dismissed him, believing Kazuma stood no chance. The giant seemed invincible even if struck with full force. Yet, he refused to let this be his end or his allies. Garrett shouted out to Kazuma, fear evident in his voice. Tataros raised a leg to crush him, but Kazuma swiftly dodged, flipping through the air. The monster missed and spread his arms in frustration. Kazuma observed, "He's exposing himself. Now's the time to attack." He lunged at the creature's leg and struck, causing it to duck. The beast attempted to slam Kazuma with his enormous fist, but he dodged again, though the force knocked him to the ground. He examined the deep crater left in the ground by the enormous strike, realizing he couldn't bring down the enemy with a single blow. His speed, remarkable for his size, combined with his incredible strength, made him a formidable opponent. It became clear he would need to adopt a strategy of wearing down his adversary over time. Doing so, he believed, would lead to a steady increase in his level. Summoning his agility and speed, he lunged forward and slashed at the monster's leg. Without pause, he launched a relentless series of attacks, neither giving himself nor his foe a moment of respite. The adventurers watched in awe, captivated by the ferocity of the fight. One exclaimed, "Didn't he tell him this was crazy?" Another noted, "It seems he's moving even faster." Indeed, with each strike, the protagonist grew quicker, his movements becoming increasingly swift. Leaping and spinning midair, he struck from various angles, preventing the monster from recovering. He called out to his opponent, "How do you like that?" Summoning all his strength, he swung a decisive blow, causing the creature to collapse to the ground. Without hesitation, he crushed its head, finishing the monster off. In disbelief, Garrett exclaimed, "He truly defeated it single-handedly. An A-rank beast by himself." Approaching the exhausted hero, who was catching his breath after the intense confrontation, Garrett asked if he could see his stats. The protagonist responded casually, "That bothersome screen? No problem. I hadn't looked at it in a while. It was ringing so loudly." He activated the system window, revealing his level as 259. Garrett and the others stared in shock at the impressive number. Finally, the young man said, "No wonder he's so strong. That's a rank adventurer's level. He's only about level 1 or 2, yet he's twice as powerful." Garrett looked at him with confusion, questioning how he had achieved such strength at a young age. Arius, Eaglement amazed, asked, "What does someone have to do to reach such a level?" The protagonist, puzzled, tousled his hair and replied, "How can I explain it? For example, do you see that rock shaped like a rabbit's head?" The travelers nodded in agreement. Kazuma picked up a simple stone and hurled it at the cliffside. Garrett, bewildered, asked what he was doing. The hero activated the system window again, which displayed that his throwing skill had increased from 2 to 11. Garrett was stunned. His level had surged by 9 points with just a single throw. Kazuma grabbed another stone, aimed at the cliff, and tossed it at a protrusion resembling an ear. The system then showed his throwing skill had risen from 11 to 23. Garrett thought he was losing his mind. After the first throw, the rock hadn't even reached its destination. The distance and velocity were completely different than before. The protagonist recognized that he was leveling up his skills at a far faster rate than typical. Garrett looked at him with awe and wondered, "What kind of extraordinary gift is this? If someone like him joined us, it would be nothing short of a stroke of luck." He was about to speak to the protagonist when Arya quickly cut him off and turned toward the main character. The girl offered her apologies, explaining she had only asked him to stay with them briefly, but now she wondered if he could continue to be their ally. The princess reflected that, considering his kindness with the rubies, her query might seem brazen, yet they needed as many allies as possible. She understood that an A-rank hero had little motive to help them, but she still clung to hope. The protagonist responded with a firm agreement. His affirmation didn't immediately reach Arya and Garrett, leaving them surprised when they finally understood his decision. One of them asked in astonishment, "What did he just say?" The main character chuckled kindly and repeated that he was willing to help. He added that, if he truly could make a difference, he would do everything in his power. Moreover, he knew these lands well and couldn't simply abandon them, especially knowing that hostile forces were pursuing them. Arya's luck seemed to turn. She asked him sincerely if he was serious. Kazuma confirmed his resolve and assured her he would do whatever it took to keep them safe. Overcome with emotion, Garrett bowed his head slightly in gratitude. The princess remarked that they could now count on his aid as well. Their expressions softened into smiles, reminiscent of old friends reunited. The allies began their journey. The adventurer, recalling the protagonist's combat style, commented on how extraordinary his movements were. Sheepishly, Kazuma replied that he had only been trying to survive. Suddenly, as he swung his axe, the handle snapped in two, catching everyone off guard. The weapon clattered to the ground, and the protagonist bent over, lamenting, "How could my brother's axe break like that?" Garrett wisely suggested considering Doppelganger and now Titanos as possible causes. Each battle that followed seemed increasingly fierce. It was clear Kazuma was reaching his limit. The adventurer patted him reassuringly on the back and said, "It's time for him to step aside." Garrett was about to speak, but Arya cut him off, noting that everything was fine. Kazuma had helped them before, and they would need his assistance again. He asked why they didn't give him his weapon, to which Arya explained that Kazuma was currently their highest level member, making his combat skills already considerable. There was no reason to diminish his power. Improving attack capabilities even marginally was crucial. Wouldn't that be the best course for their group? Garrett remained silent, lost in thought. Arya then addressed him with a gentle smile, implying that he perhaps doubted whether they could proceed without Kazuma. The head of the guard agreed that they had to do everything possible to support him. She mentioned casually that it was an informal situation, but they needed to prepare for the worst. Garrett wanted to clarify some details, but Arya, confident in her understanding, assured him he knew everything. Meanwhile, Kazuma was attempting to reconnect the broken fragments of his weapon. The princess asked him to remain still for a moment as the others lined up their supplies. Every piece of guilt and doubt seemed to fade as they prepared to face whatever awaited them next. The protagonist looked at them with surprise and asked what they were doing. Arius, clutching her sword, pressed the blade against Kazuma's shoulder and declared, "This will be over soon. Let him forgive them for dragging him into all this. But from now on, please let him continue to assist them." The travelers wore serious expressions, their determination clear. The protagonist responded quietly, "Yes, he will try." Arius handed him the sword, stating that while it might not replace his axe, he would give him this weapon. Kazuma took the blade, inspecting it and asking in disbelief, "Are they sure about this?" He then drew the sword from its sheath and burst out with delight. "Wow, it's really shiny." One of the warriors handed him a set of adventurer's gear, saying, "It's ordinary equipment, but still, let him have it." The protagonist was filled with joy. The armor too. He expressed gratitude, and the princess, blushing, replied that it was nothing. Still, it wouldn't cover even a fraction of the debt for the grand rubies. Turning to her warriors, she asked them to help Kazuma equip himself. Once everything was ready, Kazuma leaped in excitement, noticing how light the armor was. Now he felt confident facing even an A-rank monster. Arya's chuckled softly and said, "Please let him try." The protagonist assured her he would do his best. The group resumed their journey. After a while, the scout ahead announced that they could see a city approaching. The adventurer exclaimed, "It's Morris's city. How long we've been walking." Finally, some proper food. Garrett added that they would find a good restaurant there. The protagonist looked anxiously at the city's skyline and asked, "So, they have restaurants here too?" The others welcomed the news of the upcoming stop, but Garrett cautioned them not to get complacent, as danger could still be lurking nearby. The warriors immediately became alert, acknowledging his warning. The princess then asked Garrett what their plan was next. He pointed out that they would buy a carriage and horses in the city, and he would act as the guard, riding with the ladies. The protagonist looked embarrassed but nodded in understanding. Garrett mentioned that afterward, they would acquire disguises, except for Kazuma, whose identity was still unknown, and pretend to be merchants from the neighboring kingdom of Ordana's Burn Company. Aryas approved the plan, remarking that traders from Orden were common in these parts, and if they claimed to be from that renowned company, suspicion would be minimized. Garrett declared, "Then it's time to get to work." Approaching the city gates, they moved on to a restaurant. Kazuma hesitated, asking if pretending to be merchants was wise, worried they might stand out. However, the food was plentiful, and Garrett assured him there would be no problem. They needed to eat well while the opportunity was still present. He handed him a plate and advised that he should eat as well. The man nodded in agreement, wished them a good appetite, and began to eat. After finishing, he looked pleased and remarked that the meal was delicious. Their attention was suddenly drawn to a group of knights walking down the street, one of whom loudly declared that they should listen to him. They were searching for a criminal and urged anyone with information to come forward immediately. Scattering leaflets bearing the suspect's image, they distributed them in different directions. The protagonist picked one up from the ground, and a shock ran through him when he recognized Arya's face on the notice. Surprised, he examined her picture closely, about to speak when a knight's loud declaration caught his ear. The reward for any helpful tip about the princess was enormous. Instantly, he understood, so she was indeed a princess. His duty to protect her became clear. Garrett rose from the table, beckoned to the others, and whispered that they must leave through the back entrance quickly. They all nodded and hurried toward the cart. Just as they were about to set off, knights blocked their path. One of them announced loudly that they should halt. The knight's tone was surprisingly calm as he questioned the large entourage. Where was a party this extensive headed? The reply was that they had concluded their business in this city and were returning home to Ordana, from the Burn Trading Company. Hearing this, The knight confirmed he was from the same well-known firm. Was their dealings successful? Garrett replied affirmatively, mentioning they had acquired a substantial amount of giggle fabric. If the knight wished, he could take some as a sample. The knight's eyes widened with interest at the quality of the fabric, which he acknowledged was excellent. Recognizing their fatigue from the long journey, he advised them to take care on the return trip. Bowing slightly, he expressed thanks for their concern. This exchange eased their tension momentarily, and the cart began to move, its wheels creaking loudly. The noise drew the knight's attention, and he called out for the convoy to stop. Tension mounted as Garrett asked if there was a problem. With a sly smile, the knight responded that, since they were transporting giggle fabric, they should know that this fabric was renowned for its lightness. So why was their heavily loaded cart creaking so much? It was necessary to inspect the cargo. Despite feeling nervous, everyone listened carefully. The knight said the contents appeared suspicious and needed to be checked. He signaled to two other knights, who approached the cart. One of them loudly reported that, although they could see a mountain of fabric, there seemed to be something hidden behind it. He was visibly anxious about the situation, chuckling nervously as he mentioned forgetting that they had purchased a round for fat sheep. It was due to these sheep that the cart's wheels began to creak ominously. The people inside the cart started mimicking sheep sounds, trying to play along with his story. A knight, grinning broadly, rode up to the cart and inquired, "Are there fat sheep inside?" With a swift stroke of his sword, he cut through the fabric hiding the contents and declared loudly that such a thing couldn't possibly be true. Spotting the figures within, he announced loudly that they were the princess's servants. But he hadn't enough time to finish before Garrett charged forward, delivering a powerful blow to the knight's throat with his sword. The others immediately struck out at nearby knights, rallying to the cause. "We must escape the city," he shouted, urging a direct course ahead. His companions quickly agreed, leaving Kazumi stunned as he exclaimed that the man had just died. Arya's called out to check on him, concern evident in his voice. His face was drained of color as he fell to the ground, clutching his head, bewildered by what had just happened. A voice reassured him softly that there was no need to worry. He was a transcendent being. Confused, he wondered who the voice belonged to, where it had come from, and what its message meant. She worried for him, kept asking if he was all right. The mysterious voice added that someday he would understand. Still clutching his head, he struggled to comprehend the situation, feeling utterly lost. She continued to call him loudly in her concern, until he finally sat up and asserted he was fine. The events haunted him, yet Garrett firmly declared they must break through the city gates. His priority was to protect the princess. They hastily reached the city gate, where a knight was loudly commanding them to halt, warning this was the final warning. Together they pushed past the guards and rode on. Knights on horseback thundered after them, shouting that they wouldn't allow the escape. The travelers fought valiantly to fend off their pursuers and kept galloping toward the exit. At the last moment, they succeeded in breaking free from the city. Arya's watched, a triumphant smile on his face, as he announced their successful breach of the gates. Garrett, with a serious expression, urged her to hide, warning that the knights would catch up soon. A squad of mounted knights indeed chased after them, one rider loudly doubting that they could escape on a cart. The traveler apologized for pulling him into this mess, explaining that he trusted him to protect the princess. If Zealand gained power, their country was doomed, and Her Highness was their last hope. He had to safeguard her at all costs. The knight nodded in agreement, worried and asking about the others. The travelers, calm yet resolute, told him they counted on his strength. Without hesitation, they turned their horses and charged toward the pursuing knights. They launched a fierce assault, managing to hold them off temporarily. The protagonist's heart was filled with worry as he glanced back, convinced that if he didn't act, they all would perish. Resolved, he remembered the cryptic advice whispered by an unknown voice. While Garrett engaged the pursuing knights, he turned to him and shouted that rescuing the princess was his highest priority, regardless of the cost. Memories of his past flooded his mind, fueling his determination. This time, he was determined to save her no matter what. Though the exact location eluded him, the haunting feeling remained vivid. He never wished to experience that terror again. Yelling to the guards, he commanded them to cover the rear and protect the flanks as he galloped toward the carriage. Raising his voice, he insisted they heed his orders. Quickly, he began rearranging the crates, already contemplating how to find freedom amid chaos. Noticing a rope tied from one end to the cart and the other around his waist, he saw potential. As long as the carriage remained intact, he could retreat swiftly after an attack, always staying close enough to regroup. Without hesitation, he leapt into combat, charging at the knights who advanced too close. With his sword, he struck them down. Using the rope, he retreated to the cart, pushed off and swiftly slew another knight. Garrett watched in amazement, remarking aloud that he'd never seen such a fighting style. One of the knights shouted indignantly, questioning why he was still alive and urging his archers to shoot him. The protagonist responded by flying back to the cart, swinging the rope to deflect incoming arrows with his sword, and muttered grimly that circumstances were dire. His concern deepened when he heard a scream from the cart. Arya announced that Malua had been hit in the leg by an arrow. Though the wound was not life-threatening, she assured that she would tend to it. The protagonist stared in awe, contemplating the reality of such magic from another world. He then saw arrows again streak toward the cart and realized now was not the moment for thoughts. He had to act. Spotting another coil of rope, an idea struck him. He leapt onto a nearby knight, kicked him off and rested his horse. Tying the rope to the saddle, he galloped toward approaching enemies. Using his feet, he struck several knights and wrapped the rope around them, then jumped onto another steed. He spurred the horse back toward the carriage, causing the horses of the knights to become entangled and stumble. Garrett watched in astonishment, loudly praising the incredible horsemanship, as if man and horse moved as one. He wondered where such riding skill had been learned. Kazumi called out, urging them to ride toward the narrow valley ahead, confident that the tight space would prevent the enemies from attacking all at once. The protagonist nodded in agreement, continuing to fend off the relentless assault. One knight persisted, following them and noting the daring tactics. They found the pursuit intriguing. They were merely obstacles blocking his path. Let them withdraw. He decided to face the challenge alone. As he galloped into the valley, he kept fending off the knights who insulted him. With swift strikes, he sent them sprawling in different directions, while their captain tried to push him away with his spear. Smirking, he looked ahead and claimed he was quite skilled. The protagonist was taken aback by the chaos unfolding around him and questioned, "He's attacking his own allies. What's wrong with this guy?" The rogue rider caught up with him, a broad grin on his face, teasing, "You're an arrogant novice. I'll train you properly." He turned, shouting sharply, warning not to get overconfident. "You're a disgusting freak who doesn't even spare his comrades," he added with disdain. The captain's face twisted with displeasure as he lunged at him with his spear, commanding him to shut up. The protagonist dodged desperately, realizing that not only was the rogue skilled with words, but he also wielded his spear with remarkable precision. With tense focus, he parried each attack. The captain laughed loudly, remarking that his expression had grown more interesting and noting the feat of blocking his errant spear, which was impressive. He said that it made punishing him all the more fun. When he attempted to strike with a sword, he failed, pondering aloud that his strength must come from somewhere else. If he was on par with those giants, he believed he could handle him. The captain chuckled mockingly, asking if his expression still held hope. It was a losing battle from the start. Why? Because he was using it, the presence of the black fog-like energy. Suddenly, he screamed as a knight surged toward him, exchanging spears in a fierce clash. The moment he seized the spear, he spun it effortlessly with one hand and aimed it at his opponent. The protagonist watched, astonished, wondering what kind of weapon it was. Then, a dark, smoky energy unfurled from the spear, resembling black mist. The captain noticed his reaction and asked if he saw the spear's aura. "Is this black smoke?" he inquired. Swinging his spear, The captain declared that the dead had no right to know such things. Yet, wielding the sacred relic known as the Azure Dragon Spear, his power had surged multiple levels higher than before. He began to shape the dark energy into serpents, unleashing the skill-black hurricane of destruction. The protagonist watched in awe, suspicious that the snakes had emerged from the fog. Suddenly, a blade of a spear pierced from within the black serpent's throat. At the last moment, he dodged, and the serpents vanished into the shadows. The captain activated Black Hurricane of Destruction again, launching a barrage of attacks with his spear. Wounded, he dropped his sword. The captain, frantic with madness, roared with laughter, proclaiming that this was the end for him. He was stunned to realize he could no longer retrieve his spear. Kazumi, observing everything, declared that whether it was an artifact or another power, she didn't care. As long as he held it, its dominion belonged to him. The captain was momentarily taken aback, loudly dismissing such petty tricks as insignificant. He narrowly avoided the impending strike, yet the true peril of the Black Decay was still looming. With a resolute voice, he declared that he had no hope of being spared. His vision blurred, and a wide smile stretched across his face as he loudly proclaimed that the adventurer would soon learn the genuine terror of the Black Decay. The poison coursing through his veins was deadly, and the spear, designed with an embedded poison system, was merely a trap wielded by its creator. Even if the weapon was a legendary artifact, its potential was useless if it could not be wielded. The captain was doomed to endure the slow, agonizing effects of the poison until death claimed him. However, somehow, he managed to rally and dismiss the pain as a trivial loss of treasure. His voice tinged with pity for the cowardly wielder of the spear. He believed he could never be defeated by such a worthless opponent. The captain paused, visibly surprised, instinctively shouting that this simply couldn't be true. From where did the adversary draw such strength? Surely the poison was meant to incapacitate him. He cried out in astonishment and seized his spear, attempting to lift it. His bewilderment deepened. How could the enemy have the strength to do so? Holding onto his spear tightly, he questioned whether a human could have managed such a feat with a swift swing. He realized he might not even have the capacity to fight now, and with all his might, he threw the captain to the ground. The captain hit the earth with a surprised expression etched on his face. Pausing his horse, he asked loudly how the captain felt after the attack. Caught in fatigue, the captain staggered to his feet and declared that victory was impossible. His poison was the ancient Kataku, and he should prepare to writhe in torment before dying. The young warrior asked if this was the method intended to teach him. He then spurred his steed forward, while the captain pointed at him and shouted that someone needed to seize the Azure Dragon Spear, an object too valuable even to consider stealing. The warrior, weakened by the poison and sensing his spreading demise, realized retreat was urgent. Still, blood began to bubble in his throat, and concern for his allies grew. Glancing ahead, he feared that if he remained, they would be ambushed on the open road by enemy fire. An idea formed in his mind, but at that moment, his comrades called out desperately. He leapt from his horse at the valley's edge and declared that he would act as bait for the enemies, urging the others to continue their advance without him. They must not worry. He promised to catch up, standing firm in the narrow passage and fixing a serious gaze on the approaching knights. Arius was frantic, loudly protesting that this could not be happening. Garrett urgently called Her Highness, explaining that he had asked her to hide for her safety. This man prioritized their future over his own, becoming their shield in this dire moment. His actions were driven by a determination to ensure their survival, even if it meant risking his very life. Surging forward from that point, they sought to reach the kingdom of Orden where his aunt was to be married, their determination unwavering. She clawed at the cart's side with her nails, loudly declaring that he was left behind to stall their pursuers. Now they planned to abandon him altogether. The others in the carriage began to pull her inside, but he warned that if Her Highness was captured, the citizens of Alderaan would be trampled, and innocent women enslaved. A retreat was now crucial, a moment to withdraw. She hesitated to protest, instead dissolving into tears and calling his name with anguish. With force, she slammed her fists on the floor and lamented her inability to protect her companions, let alone the entire people. What kind of princess was she? What kind of royalty could she claim to be? Her own powerlessness filled her with misery and fear. He understood her pain deeply but urged her to hold on, reminding her that these feelings would only be meaningful once they escaped the chaos. Tears streaming down her face, she called out to him, and he replied that they wouldn't sacrifice their lives merely to revive the nation. When the time for revival arrived, their land would be even stronger, ruled by a princess who truly cared for her people. Gradually, she calmed, wiping her tears, acknowledging that circumstances had changed, and they must reach Orden no matter what. He agreed, driven by respect for the man who had sacrificed so much. But he was interrupted when Kazumi asked about what had already happened to him. His voice startled everyone, capturing their attention. They called out to him anxiously, Arya expressing relief that he was safe. Garrett, surprised and worried, asked how he had survived such severe injuries. He explained that at first he felt dizzy and nauseous, but gradually regained strength during the battle. Puzzled, Garrett inquired about what that implied, and he, with a carefree look, suggested perhaps he had grown accustomed to suffering. Unbelieving, Garrett stared at him, and the protagonist gestured openly, saying he could see for himself. Arya shouted his name sharply, and when they both looked her way, concern flashed in their eyes. She suddenly leapt from the carriage, and he managed to catch her midair before she mounted his horse. Crying, she asked what kind of person he was, how such a thing could even happen. Afterward, she tended to his wounds and apologized for the pathetic sight she had shown earlier. He reassured her, saying he was the one who should apologize for worrying her. Suddenly, a jolt shook the carriage, and they all cried out in alarm. Garrett quickly realized something was wrong, insisting they stop immediately. The coachman obeyed, and the protagonist inspected the carriage, turning around to state that the axle appeared to be bent. He scanned the surroundings and warned that if the axle broke, it could be disastrous for their journey. They concealed the cart among the bushes to facilitate the repairs, working together seamlessly. As they pushed it into the foliage, Garrett approached him, calling out softly and requesting to accompany him for a moment during the maintenance. The man glanced at Garrett, sensing curiosity or perhaps concern in his expression. Without hesitation, he grasped his spear and followed him. They soon reached a secluded spot where Arius was already seated, and both took seats nearby. Garrett knelt before Arius and expressed his gratitude, praising her for her skill in repelling the Imperial Army's attack. Arius was taken aback by this and sharply remarked that she shouldn't have done it. Still, she admitted relief that everything had ended safely. She then sought forgiveness, explaining she had sacrificed herself to buy Her Highness escape. The man assured her there was no cause for concern, emphasizing that they had a princess and a country to protect. She proffered that they need not refer to her as such, preferring to be called by her first name. She also mentioned there was no need for formal speech, as she would speak plainly as well. Although he wanted to object, Garrett smiled gently and explained that it was Her Highness's wish. Relieved, he addressed her by her first name. However, she then added that she also needed to apologize for a certain matter. Puzzled, he asked what she wished to excuse herself for. Arius explained that she had concealed her true identity and asked him to forgive her for this deception. He found her princess status understandable and logical. She expressed gratitude, praising his kindness, and requested permission to reintroduce herself. She was the first princess of the kingdom of Aldebaran, named Arius Sam Alexandros. Her majestic name surprised him, but it suited her royal stature. He introduced himself in turn, and she inquired whether Kazumi was his surname. He denied, clarifying it was simply his name. They realized that, in this world, it was customary to say the given name before the family name. This small cultural difference startled them, and he grew slightly embarrassed by his choice of words. He thought her honesty was admirable. Then he explained that he was from another world and that he had come to this one from afar. Her eyes fixed on him, and she asked if there truly was another world. He nodded affirmatively and confirmed that he had been sent here from his homeland. He wished to emphasize that someone must have brought him to this world intentionally. She listened intently, and he agreed, suggesting the likelihood was high that his arrival was not accidental. Perhaps he was summoned by someone's will. As he recalled his past, an incident surfaced in his memory. He remembered the shock of witnessing someone's death for the first time. At that moment, a voice echoed in his mind, urging him not to torment himself and revealing that he was a transcendental being. This term, transcendent, seemed to imply a person who crossed the boundaries between worlds. What those final words meant lingered in his thoughts. Eventually, he would come to understand their significance. Eris called him to inquire about what had transpired. He offered a hurried apology, explaining that he had been lost in thought. His worldview was so different from this one that he often found himself pondering numerous things. She asked whether these two worlds were truly that distinct. He responded by mentioning that, for instance, he was deeply surprised by the status screen before him. She inquired if such phenomena had ever appeared in his real world. He nodded, admitting that he initially didn't understand what was happening and was also startled by the level-up sounds. She was amazed that he was progressing so rapidly, noting that his level was growing at an extraordinary pace. Wondering about his current stats, the protagonist opened his status window. He mentioned that the notification sounds had been so irritating that he had turned them off and forgotten about them altogether. Approaching him, they gazed at the screen with astonishment and exclaimed loudly in disbelief. His statistics read, Level 885, Attack Power over 1,091 points, Defense nearly 589, Strength around 834, Endurance close to 626, Agility roughly 345, Mobility over 691, Intelligence about 381, and Spirit approximately 662. They looked at him in awe and asked, "How high is that?" Arya replied that the last time she saw his level it was only 259. This speed of growth was truly remarkable. His current level was nearing S-rank territory, which begins at 1,000 or higher, a rarity in any country. He wondered aloud what could explain such rapid advancement. Had he really fought that much? She stepped closer and loudly clarified that none of this was happening here. Surprised, he demanded an explanation for his confusion. She explained that his status screen lacked any information about mana or magical power. He regarded her with puzzlement and asked whether those attributes were supposed to be visible or accessible to everyone. Their curiosity deepened as they considered the matter. Then he called her by name, wanting to ask something important. He recalled that she had used magic before. When he was injured, she cast healing spells on him. He expressed gratitude and acknowledged that what she did was indeed magic. She asked whether magic existed in his home world. He confirmed that it did not, which is why he was so surprised to see such things here. She paused thoughtfully, suggesting that perhaps the absence of mana and magic statistics on his screen was because magic was non-existent in his original universe. He was puzzled and wanted to know one more thing. He showed them a spear, asking what it was. From its appearance, he believed it must be an artifact. Garrett was stunned by what he saw and asked loudly, "Where did he get that?" The protagonist, surprised by Garrett's reaction, explained that he had acquired the spear recently in a battle. It was supposedly in the possession of a warrior named Souza. Garrett's eyes widened in recognition, and he asked loudly if he knew anything about it. He explained that Souza was a member of the Imperial Army, renowned for its strength, and headed a special unit called the Black Serpent. Garrett deduced that this spear must have belonged to him and called it the Azure Dragon Spear. They both looked to the side for a moment when he asked if something was wrong. She then revealed that the spear was one of the secret relics of their kingdom, Alderaan, stolen long ago from the royal treasury. It was thought to have been lost forever. Most likely, it was the work of the Empire, which explained Souza's harsh treatment of the relic. If so, the weapon needed to return to its rightful owner. He handed her the spear and told her to take it. She seized the spear, signaling that it was truly a divine providence. After passing through many hands, the relic had finally ended up with the princess's knight, serving to protect them all. From now on, he believed the spear must be used to shield their group. He called her and emphasized the significance of such an artifact, vowing, "I swear on this spear that I will protect everyone." Garrett then approached, pointing at the weapon and inquiring about a specific part. Kazumi examined it and explained that Souza had modified the spear so that pressing a protrusion would release poison. Indignant, he picked up the spear and loudly condemned such treachery on a sacred item. This was utterly outrageous. He observed it looked glued on and suggested removing it immediately to ensure the spear's purity. Still, he was cautious, warning that the poison made the modification dangerous and that they must handle it carefully. Noticing Arya nearby with concern, he called her over and asked what had happened. She explained that, based on the story, they had been fighting the Black Snake Squad, which indicated they were being hunted. Garrett realized that the attackers must be from the Greenwald Legion, the most formidable force in the Empire. The protagonist asked if such a legion could truly be so strong, and she confirmed it. Even neighboring countries regarded them as the mightiest, with reports that they had easily crushed their armies during invasions. Recalling these details was painful for him, and she added that she almost forgot to mention the artifacts. According to legend, they were crafted by gods for amusement, mostly serving as weapons or armor. The Azure Dragon Spear, in particular, was a prime example. He wondered whether such legendary relics truly existed in this world. Shifting focus, he called her and asked if he could inquire about the kingdom of Alderaan. She agreed, and he questioned whether the kingdom had been suddenly attacked by the Belgian Empire. She confirmed this, recalling that, 3 days before meeting him at dawn, they had crossed the border and launched a surprise invasion. Their homeland had fallen rapidly due to the overwhelming assault. Feeling a bit embarrassed to ask, he hesitated but finally inquired about her family's fate. She responded that Her Majesty the Queen and her brother, the Crown Prince, had been killed. He offered his condolences, and she looked up, quietly wondering if her brother was still alive. He asked softly, "Didn't her brother die?" She mentioned that, aside from His Highness, the Crown Prince, there was another person she called brother, a cousin, the son of her father's younger brother. She found it understandable and asked if that was good, meaning her brother might still be alive. Arius concurred, explaining that during the Belgian invasion, her brother was on his own lands and not in the royal capital. Deep inside, she wished her brother were still alive. It was comforting to know she still had some support around her. Suddenly, she felt faint, causing immediate concern among everyone. Garrett, alarmed, asked loudly what was wrong. She, clutching her head, demanded they stop. She was frightened and needed everything to cease. Her distress was evident. The MC gently held her and reassured her that everything was fine. She snapped back to reality, apologized, and claimed she was okay. Then, a scene resembling a dream suddenly unfolded in her mind. He inquired if it was the scene with her brother. She confirmed, describing a dark room filled with about 10 masked figures. She lay in bed, unable to move, when one of them removed his mask, her brother. He asked her, with subtle surprise, if he was among those wearing masks. She nodded, feeling terrified, and begged her brother for reassurance. He responded with his usual smile, assuring her everything was all right and that she need not worry. Then she realized it was only a dream. Despite this, she couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Garrett exhaled in relief and told her not to scare them like that again. She apologized, acknowledging she had caused worry. Kazumi found her reaction odd, contemplating whether the assault might have been a stress-induced memory flood. If true, perhaps it had some basis in reality. She moved closer and asked if he wanted to try magic. Surprised, he asked, "Did she say magic?" She took his hands and explained she'd calmed enough to teach him, if he wished. Currently, his status screen revealed no mana points or magic power, likely because he hadn't yet practiced magic. She asked if he wanted to give it a shot. Garrett, visibly excited, replied that it was a fantastic idea. His strength was already formidable, but adding magic would make him unstoppable. Though a bit confused, it seemed he recognized the need to try. He asked to be instructed in magic. Arya, smiling happily, said she'd handle it, claiming she was better at magic than anyone else. He looked proud and said that it would be valuable to learn grand magic directly from Her Highness. Most knights focused on physical attacks, he understood, and asked where to begin. She told him to ignite a fire within his heart. He should close his eyes and imagine being surrounded by darkness. Following her guidance, he lit a candle in that dark space. She told him to slowly open his eyes while keeping that image in mind. He was instructed to open his palms and turn them upward, as if attempting to scoop water to drink. Then, he should imagine igniting a fire within his hand. His task was to conjure a visible flame, a mystical blaze emerging from nothing. He tried, gazing intently at his palms, and asked himself aloud, "Did it not work?" She observed him and commended his impressive concentration, then gently requested him to display his status screen once more, as it might reveal some clues. He complied, and she marveled at his extraordinary status display. Such a high level of skills at his age seemed almost impossible to find anywhere else in the world. The levels across various abilities were simply astonishing. She suddenly noticed something unusual and sharply questioned what it might mean. Garrett approached and asked her to clarify what had caught her attention. She pointed at the status screen and instructed him to focus on the experience graph. Moving closer, he examined it carefully and then asked aloud, "What is this?" She confirmed his suspicion and explained that the required experience for leveling up, as well as for all skills, was set to just 1. This implied that only a single experience point was necessary for the next level advancement. No matter how advanced a skill was or how high the level, this explained his remarkably high level. He was taken aback, realizing, "Exactly. Now I understand what's going on. That's why my levels kept rising even during battles." Normally, in classic RPGs, experience needed for leveling increases steadily over time. But if only one experience point is enough for everything, then leveling up can happen infinitely fast. Despite feeling happy about this discovery, he wondered how he had acquired such an ability in the first place. She looked at him with some amusement and asked how many more surprises he intended to spring on them. He replied in confusion that he hadn't done it intentionally. She acknowledged this but pointed out that, after all, he was a human thrown into this unfamiliar world. He wondered why he was here, why he possessed such extraordinary powers, or if they were forced upon him. She bowed in apology and explained that she had dragged him, an outsider, into the ongoing war against Belgen. This left him puzzled, but he tried to reassure her that he shouldn't worry. He didn't fully understand everything, yet he sensed that some of it might be fabricated. She expressed genuine gratitude, saying that without him, they would no longer be in this world. Grand and Reuben, too, owed their survival to him. Thanks to his intervention, they would have enough resources to restore their kingdom. Feeling somewhat embarrassed, he pointed out that their kingdom was still within the territory of Aldebaran. She hesitated to confirm this but then refused, explaining that since the treasure deposit had not yet been discovered, he could rightfully claim it all for himself. Nevertheless, he happily offered to share it with them. This made him nervous, and he inquired about their destination, to the kingdom of Orden. She agreed, and he then asked what kind of relationship existed between Orden and Aldebaran. She responded that her aunt, the younger sister of the late king, had married the king of Orden. He proceeded to ask if the two kingdoms maintained friendly relations. She nodded with a cheerful smile, recalling that her aunt had loved her dearly during her childhood. She believed that if they managed to reach the kingdom of Orden, her aunt would surely come to their aid. He listened to the distant pounding of hooves, grabbed a spear, and asked, "Is that true?" But he heard nothing in response. They began scanning the surroundings. The main character closed his eyes and assessed that the approaching cavalry was larger than what they saw. Noticing their speed and coordination, he urgently advised everyone to prepare to hide. This was likely the Imperial army. Surprised by what they overheard, Garrett loudly ordered the guards to start camouflaging the carriage immediately. They quickly set about their task. Kazumi suggested that everyone conceal themselves in a spot invisible from the road. Taking Arya's hand, he led her away and instructed her to hide as well. In that moment, he realized escape seemed impossible. All they could do now was wait. He thought they had managed to hide, but the enemy's numbers were terrifying. Closing his eyes again, he sensed the approaching force and believed it was much larger than before. If they were discovered, it would be the end. He looked at her, resolved that he would protect them if it came to that. The knights arrived at their hideout and advised that they had not gone far enough and needed to keep moving along the road. As they began to leave, he thought that the sound of hooves was gradually fading. They were fortunate. Just then, the wobbly axle they had been repairing produced a loud creak. He peeked out from behind a bush, worried that the soldiers in the rear might have noticed it. Hearing the noise, they turned around and drew their weapons. Instantly, he retreated into the bushes, convinced they had heard it too. The knights scanned the area, shouting that the sound was coming from somewhere nearby and that they should start searching. The protagonist pondered his options. Even if they subdued the soldiers here, a signal could alert the entire army to their presence. Suddenly, a voice assured him he had nothing to fear because he was a transcendent. He found himself in a dark realm and questioned his true nature. The voice explained that even if an entire army united against him, they were not his enemies. No matter how powerful the adversary, they would eventually meet. Regaining consciousness, he wondered what that encounter was. Clutching a spear, he thought he could handle whatever came because he had faced and defeated enemies before. Peering out from behind the bush, he decided to go, instructing everyone to run through the forest path. Garrett grasped his hand and refused, insisting they should fight together if a battle was inevitable. The others agreed, but he quietly expressed his gratitude for their support, asserting that he was capable of dealing with this alone. The knights had discovered a cart nearby, and he quickly sprinted toward them, urgently urging them to flee the area. Without hesitation, he closed the distance and drove his spear through the first knight's chest. When another knight attempted to strike him, he skillfully deflected the attack, then pressed on, sending rapid, decisive blows that dispatched the closest enemies. Suddenly, one of the knights let out a piercing whistle to alert the others. Turning briefly, he saw Arya's and the others fleeing, and he felt a rush of confidence, believing he could now wield his spear freely. He charged at the remaining knights and swiftly defeated them all with calculated strikes. Emerging onto the main road, he immediately spotted a gathering of knights approaching. Souza caught sight of him and, surprised, loudly questioned why he was still alive. The protagonist looked at him calmly, replying that he had also survived. Souza then demanded loudly, "Does he think he's so invincible? He'll die before long. He better explain why he's still breathing after the ancient Kataku poisoning." The hero explained that he had simply woken up and neutralized the poison. Souza couldn't believe it and raised his voice in annoyance, asking how that was even possible. The hero looked at his spear and said confidently that he was wielding the Azure Dragon Spear. If he returned it now, he would regret it deeply, but he refused to give it back. Enraged, Souza dismounted from his horse, declaring that he would kill him and take the Azure Dragon's spear back, as he had fought with it from the very beginning. He assumed a combat stance, smiling grimly, and said that this time, the outcome would be different, and he would become prey to that spear. Just as they prepared to engage, the loud sound of hooves suddenly echoed in both their ears. They turned to see a large group of knights approaching. Souza announced that they were awaiting his lord's command. The man in black armor dismounted from his horse, calling out to Souza, stating that he had heard of his impressive victory over him. Souza bristled at the words and insisted that he had only been caught off guard. The armored man then remarked that he had heard Souza relied on black wind magic and added that, as an A-rank knight, defeating him was no small feat. The stranger introduced himself as Kaiser Greenwald. His last name caught Kazumi by surprise, leading him to wonder if he was indeed the commander of the strongest Imperial Legion. The stranger dismissed the concern, claiming there was nothing extraordinary about it. Souza, however, was visibly annoyed and loudly questioned if they truly understood who stood before them. This was the general commanding the Empire's most formidable legion, and one of only 3 S-rank knights in their country. Observing him, Kazumi deduced that as an S-rank knight, his strength exceeded 1,000. The stranger looked at him calmly and asked what the problem was. Was he genuinely frightened after hearing about the S-rank designation? He considered that, although he might be at a higher level now, experience was the true key to growth. If he had the chance to improve his skills in battle, he claimed he wouldn't feel even the slightest bit of fear. Kaiser found this attitude admirable. Turning toward the knights, he instructed them to search for the princess while he would handle the threat himself. Suo requested him to wait, insisting he would take responsibility and defeat the opponent. But Kaiser dismissed the plea, stating he had no time to hear repetitions, and confidently turned around, declaring loudly that the princess must have escaped along a forest path. He ordered the others to pursue her without delay. The protagonist moved to stop Kaiser, shouting that he would not allow them to pass. In response, Kaiser began to emit a surge of powerful energy. His body seemed to react instinctively, and he immediately wondered about the source of that aura, an order of magnitude stronger than Souza's. Kaiser then accused him of turning his back on him, yet he found Kaiser intriguing despite the arrogance. Anxiety crept in as he realized that to reach Eris, he must first confront Kaiser. It also became clear that Kaiser's sword was no ordinary weapon. He knew that surviving Kaiser's initial strike was crucial. If he could endure that attack, he believed he could level up. Despite his overconfidence, Kaiser inquired aloud about his intentions. He chose to adopt a defensive stance. As Kaiser swung his sword and charged swiftly, the protagonist was taken aback by his speed. He managed to block the strike, and with a surprised expression, thought that he had never faced such resistance before. He exerted all his strength to hold off Kaiser's sword but was shocked by its overwhelming power. He was knocked aside but stayed upright, gazing at Kaiser and remarking that it was not bad. He was the first person in ages to halt his sword. It seemed Kaiser could truly entertain him. The protagonist watched Kaiser with concern, recognizing that he had withstood the initial blow. Still, after that single attack, his muscles felt torn to shreds. Was this the power of someone ranked S level 1000 and above? His current level was approximately 885. Did he have enough time to level up? Kaiser observed him standing there and asked what had happened. He rushed at Kaiser, unleashing a flurry of rapid strikes, demanding, "Is that all you've got?" He dodged near the last moment and counterattacked, blocking Kaiser's sword with a quick parry. Commenting on his skill, he acknowledged Kaiser's impressive moves. The battle intensified as he manipulated his sword and spear, suggesting they should enjoy the fight a little more. Kaiser, raising his head, declared loudly that he wasn't there for entertainment. He then questioned the purpose of fighting so fiercely, asking himself, "Is this what I'm risking my life for? And who exactly is he?" There was no information in the reports about anyone like Kaiser. Kazumi parried his strikes and confidently stated that he didn't need to respond to provocations. He planned to defeat Kaiser swiftly and catch up with Souza. As he launched another attack, he asked, "So, are you here to protect the princess?" His sword began to glow with dark energy. A sense of danger pierced through him, and he sensed that the terrifying aura was returning. Kaiser drew his sword and declared that he would demonstrate his resolve. With a worried expression, he raised his spear in front of him and prepared to summon his last reserves of strength. Both fighters launched their assaults simultaneously. To his own surprise, he questioned silently, "Does he even possess a fighting aura?" His eyes widened in astonishment as he asked, "Did he say fighting aura?" The display he observed was entirely different from anything he had seen before. Kaiser stood firm, praising the spectacle of a rainbow-colored fighting aura emanating from his opponent, a phenomenon utterly unfamiliar to him. Recognizing the skill to reflect his own aura, he felt compelled to pay his respects and decided to unleash his ultimate secret technique to overwhelm his adversary. A formidable aura burst forth, causing trees to sway and horses to panic. The protagonist sensed a sudden heat building within him, pondering whether Kaiser's fighting aura was intensifying. Kaiser assumed a combat stance and announced that he would unveil his most potent attack. Firing a torrent of fiery energy, he unleashed the fiercely rising fire dragon skill. The blast threw him backward, and flames rapidly encroached upon him. The fire closed in swiftly, and panic seized him as he struggled to breathe. Was it the oxygen burning away that rendered him unable to inhale? His consciousness began to fade, and he wondered if the searing pain was to be his end in this hostile blaze. Would he die alone in this fiery trap? As these thoughts flooded his mind, he remembered the people he had met in this world. Promises made to protect them just a little longer. In that moment, a system notification appeared. His level had increased.